Well, thank you all for joining us today for our event, Blockchain and Advertising. I'm happy to be here in Santa Monica. It's a nice sunny day outside. Well, let's get started. If you need Wi-Fi access, the network name is MyEx guest, and the password is off-chain. We are thankful to MyEx for hosting all of us here in this awesome office, this penthouse. And let's get to the agenda for today. So we'll have the introduction, event, and speakers. The first session we have today is Blockchain 101. And then after that, we'll go through 3 use cases of application of blockchain to advertising technology. Then we'll have a small break, and then we'll go on to our expert panel discussion, where we'll discuss the, why you should be thinking about blockchain for advertising, what you should know, and what you should consider when you're looking at blockchain as a technology. And then also, if you've decided to use blockchain for your business in ad tech, how should you go about it, and what are the considerations you should make to adopt blockchain? And then, of course, we'll have cocktails and snacks after that for networking. So to get started, I just want to tell you a little bit about IAB Tech Lab. A lot of you may be aware of us, but just to get you started, we are a sister organization to IAB, and we are here to create standards, technical standards, specifications, and protocols like OpenRDB, MRAID, that a lot of you may be already aware of. We are also working on creating software, tools, and code libraries to support the standards that we create for helping companies adopt and implement those standards. One example is Open Measurement SDK that we just announced for helping in-app viewability measurement. The third thing that we do is services to support, again, adoption and implementation of standards. For example, compliance services to certify that you have correctly implemented a particular standard or a technology in your technology stack. And we do this to support trustworthy and effective supply chain, and to inform and enable a better ad experience, as well as to simplify and standardize measurement, with the current focus being on the growth that we are seeing in mobile and video. So that's about Tech Lab. I want to quickly introduce our speakers today. We have a great panel of speakers, experts from ad tech, blockchain, all areas. Our first speaker is going to be Elizabeth Murray. He's Senior Vice President at 10. Then we have Richard Bush, who's the Chief Product Officer at MyEx, and he's also the co-chair of our blockchain working group. With him, we have Michael Palmer, who's the director at M Platform, which is a technology arm of Group M. He's also one of the co-chairs of our blockchain working group. We have Bro Walker from Kochava. He's the Senior Vice President of Blockchain at Kochava. He'll be walking us through one of the use cases. We have Ken Brook, who is the CEO of MyEx. He'll be part of a panel discussion. We have Manny Juntas from Rebel AI. They are one of our sponsors for today's event, as well as he'll be part of the panel discussion. We have Ben Feldman, is the VP of Technical Operations at MyEx. He's going to be helping us walk through one of the use cases. We have Praneeth Sharma, who is the founder of Method Media Intelligence. If you've been reading a lot of news, you would have heard about Method Media recently. And he'll be walking us through a use case for MyEx. We also have, and this is my bad, I can include Tom Bollick from MadHive. If you've not heard of MadHive, they are a startup based on blockchain for advertising. And Tom Bollick was one of the co-founders for Zynga. And he's the CTO of MadHive, and he's here to join us for the panel discussion. We are all in advertising, so we have some message from our sponsors. So the first one is going to be from Smarty Ads. They're a UK-based company, and they were not able to join us for the event, but their CEOs recorded this great video for us to watch.
and co-founders for you. Last 2 years, we have been playing a lot with the blockchain, and I'm happy that blockchain is making a lot of tectonical shifts to the industry today. We have built a full stack solutions for the attack using blockchain where it's applicable and where it's needed. I'm a big hater of blockchain used just for the purpose of the blockchain. And I'm a big believer that after the hype will go down, blockchain would really change the way we are doing business today. If you want to see how the infrastructure could solve a lot of questions that we put forward every day, like fraud, viewability, lack of trust, lack of transparency, I will be happy to consult you for free. Let's talk. Let's see how blockchain will change everything we are doing today.
Our next sponsor is Kochava. So, bro, do you want to come and say a few words?
Thank you, Shaylee. Kochava is a 5-year-old company. We are in the mobile measurement and attribution space. We started developing our blockchain solutions about 3 years ago very quietly, filed some patents. And I most recently came from FinTech. I'm new to Kochava, but I have some ad tech background and I'm very excited about the real practical applications of blockchain. And we'll talk more about it today. But we have an existing business, so it's a little bit different for us than some teams in that we are an established company in the digital measurement space, doing now layering blockchain onto our solutions. Thanks. Oh, sorry, we have a slide. Yeah, so I won't do too much advertising, but these are some of our customers. We run about $7 billion now in ad spend on our network, or we measure. We have about 1.7 or now 1.8 billion verified mobile device IDs. So we're one of the largest independent databases of mobile measurement out there. So I won't go into too much more detail. A lot of big game companies, Starbucks, McDonald's, et cetera, are customers of ours. And where blockchain fits in really well with us is we have a 2-year-old product now called Collective, which is just that. People contribute data into the collective and they receive insights in return for that. So for us to put that on blockchain is a very natural extension of the product. And although we have a lot of big companies, we're honored to have a lot of big companies trust us. Ideally, they would just trust the chain. And so we want to take that trust function out and make it more dynamic and more of even more collaborative than it is today. I already spoke to these metrics, and yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, bro. So our next sponsor is Rebel AI, and we have Manny from Rebel AI.
Thanks for coming out. Well, so how many of you are in advertising? FinTech? Or not any tech, you're just interested? All right. So I'm a CEO and founder of Rebel AI. I've been in advertising for about 20 years. I see a lot of familiar faces. Blockchain is really interesting for us. So we actually want to solve some real problems that are happening in the advertising space today. So given that so many of you are ad tech, are you familiar with this craziness? Just to talk to you a little bit about it. This is actually what's happening in the advertising ecosystem. DSPs are connected everywhere, and SSPs are connected everywhere, and it's hard to keep track of all the transactions that are happening in the space. I've built probably about 5 ad platforms down to the lowest level with regard to the protocols that are being exchanged. So I understand the environment, and I'm really excited about blockchain and what it can do for our advertising ecosystem. I wanted to show you this because it literally is that crazy. So here's what our product is. It's called Passport. Basically, our promise is to encrypt campaigns that are actually in the advertising ecosystem, verify every impression that's happened, reduce wasted spend, and restore trust back into the delivery of an ad impression. Here's what our promise is to publishers. We want to protect their digital identity. I think everyone in here has probably heard of domain spoofing ad nauseum, and it hasn't really been solved. So, we're going to be protecting that publisher identity through security and math. And so that's our promise. It's an easy install. We actually work with CDNs, the edge servers, to make a lot of this solution happen. And we feel that once we clean up the ecosystem, that CPMs for publishers will be higher by the inherent nature that there probably isn't that much inventory in the advertising ecosystem. And we have real-time reporting on false positives and everything that's happening with regard to a media transaction. So with that said, shoot me an email if you're interested.
Thank you, Manny. So this brings us to the first session for today. So I would invite Elizabeth.
All right, let me just check one thing. Can everyone hear me?
Yep.
All room? All right, so I might move around a little bit. I might stay a little closer, a little further, depending on how much this screeches. Hi, Elizabeth Murray. I come from 10, a discovery communications company, and we are we're a traditional print publisher, and now we are a digital media publishing company. So I'm here today as your layman. You've got a lot of experts in the room. You've got a lot of people who are going to be coming up here and talking to you very specifically about what they're doing with blockchain in order to improve the industry, improve your revenue, improve profits. I'm not that person. I am the layman of the group. I'm the person who's coming in with an enthusiasm for blockchain. I love it. I'm interested in it. I've gone down that rabbit hole. And because of my history, because of who I am, I get the question a lot, what is blockchain? So I've had a little bit of experience answering it. I've pulled together a bit of an elevator pitch. I'm going to try that out with all of you here today and try to give you the very top line, not only on what blockchain is, that's a bit of a complex answer. I will try to keep it as simple as possible, but also what is the potential of it? There are a lot of people who are talking about its potential, but sometimes that can be a little bit harder to understand without getting into the tech. We're going to try to demystify some of that. I hope there are some folks here in the room who actually need this 101. For the rest of you, enjoy your nap. So what is blockchain? 3 words, very simple, slightly less simple answer. My introduction to blockchain was actually probably very similar to many people who want to do cryptocurrency. When Bitcoin hit the market, I jumped right in. I got very excited. I started finding out why this is cool and how this is cool and how much can I invest and is this really exciting? And I learned about the technology so that I wouldn't be completely lost when things like forks happen. I also have had 15 years of experience in ad tech, mostly on the publishing side. So I run ad operations groups. I have worked with database administration. So my particular background is all about data. I love data. I love data management. I love data architecture, integrity. Data integrity is a thing. I actually love the manipulation of data and how that works. So when I dove into Bitcoin, Ethereum, cryptocurrencies, what I discovered very, very quickly is that what drives them, the blockchain technology that drives it, is all about data and how we can get better, cleaner, faster, all sorts of things. So that is how I became the resident expert within our office, and that is why a lot of people come to me in the office and say, what is blockchain? And that's how I came to where we are. So what is blockchain? Let's start with the elevator pitch. Blockchain is a distributed digital ledger. It's the first part of the pitch. A lot of people were with me at this point. This makes sense. No problem, easy to understand. They get this part. Moving on, next piece. That records and transfers data. Again, nothing scary here. I get a lot of nods from people I'm talking to. Sounds like a database, records and transfers data. I get that part. I can do this. I know blockchain, right? And then you move into in a manner that is secure, immutable, and auditable. And again, people are nodding along. This makes sense. I get this. That's great. Problem is, the next question I get is, that's it? Because this description, which admittedly is a layman's description, isn't revolutionary. We're not talking about things that people don't understand. So now I've got a whole bunch of people staring at me saying, well, that's great, except don't we already have that? I mean, secure data is absolutely nothing new. Auditable data, not new. Every company's been audited, every person's been audited at some point and in some way. Immutable. A lot of people had to go back to their SATs for that, but unchanging data that you can rely on. Again, isn't this what we've already got? Why is the blockchain, which is this, why does this have so much more potential than anything that has come before it? So in order to kind of get into that, you do need to understand a little bit of how the technology works. I'm not going to get into a super deep primer, but this will help understand the potential. So a ledger, what is a ledger? For the purposes of blockchain, a ledger is a collection of records that holds data. It's just as simple as that. The blockchain is the ledger. Within that chain, there are blocks of records, and those records hold data. At its very simplest, that is exactly what we're talking about. But what makes that ledger so powerful is that it is distributed. So what we're really talking about is, let's use an example. You've got a database, and you're recording records within that database. And you've got the name Elizabeth as the first name in that record. So you take that, you upload it, great. Now Elizabeth is in a database somewhere. Fantastic. And you may have copies of that database, but it exists in that one centralized location. It exists in that single place. The difference with blockchain is when that Elizabeth, that data is recorded, it's actually copied over and over and over on every single computer, every machine that's participating in the network of that blockchain, right? And we'll get to security in a moment. I know that makes people nervous. We'll get there. So why is that important? It's important because the more copies of those blocks or of those data that exist, the harder it is for anyone to go in and make a change, right? You can make a change. To be clear, you can go in and edit records. You can correct records. But in order to do that, you will also be making a change to the database that gets recorded by every single one of the computers, every single one of the copies. So it can be agreed upon by everyone who's participating in that blockchain. So this means that if someone does hack in, go in, tries to get into a piece of data and change it on one computer, you can always look at all of the other copies and see that that doesn't match what the rest of your blockchain is telling you is the truth about that record. So now we've got something that is immutable. You've got a record that cannot be changed without everyone who's participating in that blockchain seeing the change and understanding what was and what is today, right? So that's the immutability piece of it. The other piece of it that being distributed makes possible is the auditability, right? So now, because you have a record of every single change, and because everyone in the blockchain can see that, you have a way of seeing where a record started, where it went, and every step along the way. So we've taken care of two of the three elements from the end of that elevator pitch. So the last is security, right? So cryptocurrencies, the originators of blockchain, use an advanced cryptography in order to secure the data before it gets recorded, right? So you have your data, you've got your name, you've got Elizabeth. You are recording those data onto the blockchain, and before it gets recorded, it is encrypted. There are other people here who may get into that later today. I'm not going to do too deep a dive, but that encryption, what you need to know about it, takes care of two things. First of all, it secures the data, which is great. But secondly, it also provides the record of all of the changes. So it does double duty. That encryption is the reason that you cannot go in and make a change to a single record without everybody else knowing that it happened in an unauthorized way, right? The other piece of security about blockchains has to do with whether they are public or whether they are private. There are a lot of different types of blockchains, and they are created very specifically based on the needs of the people who are participating in the group, right? So you can have a public blockchain like cryptocurrencies. And the strengths of them is that they are very transparent. You can see every transaction that has taken place. Everyone can see every transaction that has taken place in an encrypted way. It's a solid record that people can trust. Private blockchains could exist in situations where people do want to be able to exchange data among the people within that private blockchain, but they don't necessarily want a public record of every transaction that happens. And there are open blockchains, secure blockchains, public, private, they're a lot different, and they're all driven by the needs of the group that created blockchain in the first place. All right. So there it is. Distributed digital ledger that records and transfers data in a manner that's secure, immutable, and auditable. So you're starting to see now what some of the potential is here, as I said so far, in a lot of what we're doing. How does this really differ from databases in the past? So previous ledgers were paper ledgers, right? You had paper ledgers, and then in the 70s you went into a database and digital platforms, and then the internet came along, and now everything is distributed across the internet, and everyone can access it, enter data into the database. A lot of the problem with that, and the problem that blockchain starts to solve, is with the transfer of data and the cost of transferring that data, right? A lot of people have used a lot of different analogies to get this point across. As someone who has just had to shepherd a bunch of people through an orientation process in a company, it became very clear to me. Anyone who's been through orientation knows you spend an entire day writing exactly the same information about yourself over and over and over onto 700 different pieces of paper so that they can get recorded in different databases across the universe, right? So that's a high transaction cost to get the data from you in that. Anyone who's had to switch healthcare providers knows, or switch insurance, knows how difficult it is to get it's just standard data. This is the same stuff you enter everywhere into the database of that new company. You've got to write it all over a second time. Quite frankly, a pain. So blockchain starts to help create a way to allow all of the folks, let's say in a healthcare sector, to participate in a blockchain that contains basic data about a patient. There could be a separate private blockchain, or maybe it's a similar blockchain for data for actual patient records that is secure, that can be shared back and forth between different doctors' offices, who don't have to then sync up their database and make sure they have exactly the same fields and exactly the same entries, right? So this is where the potential starts to hit. It makes it easier as well for groups to agree on common sets of standards. So we can start to use blockchain to ask questions of a group and record the answers in a way that everyone can see, everyone can access all the time. And it makes it much easier for groups to come to consensus about things like rules of engagement, things like best practices. So you're going to hear today from companies that are doing exactly that. So how is it being used today, right? One of the most important things in my world about explaining blockchain is trying to get people excited about it, because it is going to take adoption. People have to understand enough about it to get excited about it, to want to use it, so that we can gain adoption. That said, I think examples are some of the best way to help illustrate some of the benefits that we've just talked about, right? So the obvious example is in cryptocurrency. A lot of people, I am sure, like me, their introduction to blockchain was through that specific avenue. Bitcoin and Ethereum are the two most popular. There are many others. But what is the problem that's being solved there? Those currencies solve the problem of verification, and they also decentralize their currency so that there is no need for a bank to monitor and then verify that I sent money to you and I actually have the money that I told you I was going to send, and then, by the way, when I said I sent it, it really got sent and then it got to you right? We use third parties to do that right now. Banks, PayPal, all sorts of companies are there because I don't trust you and you don't trust me because you want my money and I want yours. It's just so blockchain, because we do not have to trust the people that are in the chain with us, we only have to trust the data, takes some of that verification and third party out of the mix, makes it a little bit easier for transactions to happen. So finance built on the blueprints of our non-cryptocurrency projects are built on those finance. Another way people are using blockchain right now has to do with smart contracts. So if you think about it, if you've got a way to agree with parties within a chain on a record that everyone can access at any time that cannot be changed without a trail, an auditable trail. Now you've got the perfect setup for creating a function for contracts. Contracts, as they exist today, in paper, they're easy to destroy, they're easy to change, there is a lot of fraud inherent within that. Blockchain makes that safer, makes it easier. Again, you don't have to trust the person you're going into a contract with, you just need to trust that the data are immutable within that blockchain and that you can access it. So there are a lot of companies that are starting to look at that as well. Another example, yeah, let's move into that. So how is blockchain important to advertisers and publishers, right? Let's talk a little bit about the benefits. I think there are some very, very smart people here today. We're going to get very, very specific about what they do and how they're using blockchain to make your world easier. I'm not going to steal their thunder, so what I will do is talk about some of the problems that can be solved. And these are problems that we've already reviewed, right? Two of the biggest problems in advertising, I think a lot of three, there are others, but the big ones are exactly as Rebel AI already explained, fraud and records of truth, right? Fraud is rampant, you're paying for it in some way, shape, or form right now, whether you're being ripped off or whether you're paying people to help you mitigate it, to help you eliminate it, to help you track it. Doesn't matter, everyone in the room is paying. So if we have a blockchain system that we are all a part of that helps us verify two things, primarily, there are many other things that could be verified, invalid traffic and content authenticity, right? We have a way to mitigate a lot of the fraud that's happening within our industry right away. Invalid traffic, if there's a way to be able to say, this, we know it's a bot, this, we know it's fake, this, not so good. And it's something that we all trust is true. That would be incredibly helpful to the industry. Same thing with content authenticity. Not only talking about website spoofing and things where your ad isn't actually running against Motor Trend, it's running against something called Motor Tron. We can help with verification that publishers are who they say they are, but we can also use the blockchain to track that supply chain and to track a piece of content that started out on MotorTrend, not Motortron, and ended up going over to MSN, who is a partner of MotorTrend, and is now on Discovery, who is now a new partner as well, right? So you can supply chain tracking is another problem that blockchain helps to solve within. The other thing I mentioned is records of truth. We all know there are multiple players at this point in the stack to get an ad from an advertiser onto a publisher's website. A lot of those players have come up in order to mitigate fraud and things that we just talked about, but a lot of them are just exist today because, again, I don't trust you and you don't trust me, which means when an ad is running, you've got your own reporting, and your reporting tells you how many impressions were delivered. I've got my reporting, and I use that to fight you on your reporting. Then there are about 750 different tracking pixels attached to every single ad, and every single one of them is tracking a slightly different thing in a slightly different piece, and all of those have to come into play before someone gets paid. It's not an efficient system, and a lot of it exists because of trust issues, right? So blockchain has the potential to help us clean a lot of that up. If we can agree as an industry on certain records of truth, this is what we will be using to transact upon this set of records, this set of reporting. Then we can take a lot of the folks out of the middle who exist in order to help me trust you a little bit more, and we can create a system that moves much more quickly. I'm going to talk about the potential of that, and at the end, I think there's another place for that to go as well. So what are the challenges? There are a lot of challenges with blockchain. It's not something that's going to solve everyone's problems. It's not a panacea by any means. I think something that you will actually hear and see fairly commonly is a phrase that blockchain can be, and obviously it is not always, but it can be a solution looking for a problem, right? That was actually a phrase that was popularized in, I think, the May article in Forbes by Jason Bloomberg. And once that hit the airwaves, I think I've heard it about 100 times a day or so. So there's a lot of potential. I think you're starting to see that potential. I understand the potential. And because there's potential and some complexity behind it, a lot of people feel that everyone's jumping on the bandwagon and trying to say, how do I get into blockchain? How do I make it work for me? How do I find use the solutions it has within my industry? Which are good questions to ask, but it can create a lot of noise. So you'll hear from some folks today who are not doing that very specific. So what does that mean? What are some of the challenges? One of the biggest challenges with blockchain right now that prevents it from being something that's going to power an entire network like something like Facebook is speed, the speed of transaction, right? So this is not something, let me give you some context. The speed of transaction is improving all of the time. There are a lot of people who are working on the problem. But in Ethereum, the number of transactions that it could handle in any given second recently was around 25 transactions per second. It may have improved slightly since then, but that's what we're really talking about. To give you some context there, Visa handles about 45,000 transactions a second. Facebook handles about 195,000 transactions a second. So we're now talking about a technology that is ready to handle all of the transactions and everything that's happening in a large app, in a large network, or in anything that's going to involve speed of light, super fast, real-time transactions, right? So that is one of the limitations. A lot of that has to do with the fact that every time you change the blockchain, a copy of it gets recorded on every single one of the nodes within the chain, right? So there are a lot of smart people working on this. There are a lot of people trying to come up with secure, immutable ways to allow parts of the chain to be handled by different parts of the network. A lot of people are very optimistic about speed improvements between now and Q1 of next year. I've read a number of different estimates on that. I think a lot of people are hopeful to kind of bring it into an average that we'll see about a 10 times increase in speed by 2019. So, and possibly even sooner. There are a lot of people working. So, but don't expect that you'll be able to jump right in and see blockchain as the sole handler of all transactions and the sole power behind large networks. I think to start with, and again, folks today are going to help tell you a little bit more about how they're handling it, but that's a little ways off. The other piece of it has to do with the complexity of the explanation, right? I mean, as I have been somewhat painfully going through, this is not something that's really easy to just sort of roll off the tongue and say this is what blockchain is and this is why you should be excited. You can try, but without a little bit of an understanding of how it works, it's really hard to get the potential across. And that slows down adoption. So from my perspective as a publisher, and I've heard from other advertisers, the way to get adoption is through education, and that's really important. And that's what things like this are all about and for, but it's actually about making the connections between blockchain technology within our industry and the things that the publishers and advertisers care about. And that is protection of revenue. How is this going to help me protect the revenue that I have coming in the door today? Secondly, increase in profits and decrease in costs. Just tie it all back to the dollar signs for me, right? Make this make sense to me and to my organization. Ease of use, how many people am I going to have to send out and have trained in order for this to be something that I can use, or in order to use platforms that are on the blockchain within my organization? And finally, ease of use, and frictionless implementation, right? If I've got to completely abandon all of the databases that I use today, all of the platforms, all of the products that I have right now, in order to spin up completely new companies and completely new products, can I do that in a way that isn't going to disrupt my organization? Or am I going to start to see blockchain being employed by the vendors I'm already using, which makes a lot more sense to me as an advertiser or as a publisher, right? So I think those challenges can be mitigated by tying it back to the money, because it's always important to have. So where's it going? Obviously, there's a lot of potential here. There are a lot of problems being solved, verification problems being solved. Banks are starting to, in addition to looking at fintech, banks are starting to look at using blockchain to facilitate cross-border international transactions, and they're starting to use it for bank-to-bank transactions, right? So the two completely different branches of completely different banks being able to work together and not have to trust each other because the data they're starting to look at things like that. Government, certainly a place that could use some improvement. I'm not sure I have to actually list the problems with governments that exist, but there are many governments who are looking at managing public funds, managing things like benefits that require an awful lot of paperwork and a lot of tracking of who got what and when and where and why. Perhaps most importantly, there are a couple of great startups who are looking at using blockchain to manage voting and to mitigate fraud within the voting process. Not really a problem here, but yeah, you can see the potential there. Healthcare, I think we touched on that a little bit. Just again, management of records in a very secure way, but most importantly for healthcare and insurance companies, the transfer of data. Right? And then finally, within the advertising industry, I do want to close by talking about some of the potential within the advertising industry. I think we're all here, we're all wondering, how does this help us deliver ads better? How does this help us get better at banner monetization? And that's really great. When I think about and talk about blockchain and the potential of where it could get, I'm not talking about how we can track and manage delivering banners to people who don't want to see them. I'm talking about creating connections between consumers and advertisers in a way that involves much more true engagement with product, with brand, and using publishers to facilitate those connections, right? So imagine a world where, and I'm going to use MotorTrend as an example, probably enough I understand my side. So in MotorTrend, I've got a whole bunch of clients who are running banner ads that no one wants to see and driving them off into client websites to perform a whole bunch of ROIs that we cross our fingers our users are going to perform. What I would like to see is a situation where I'm not running Ford's ads on the Ford Fusion page at any given point in time. I am taking those actions that the Ford company wants their users to take, and I'm pulling them into my website. I'm making the connection between Ford and a consumer who wants to buy a car right there on the page where they're trying to find reviews and trying to find information about that car. And because I've got blockchain and because the advertiser and I can work much more closely together, I'm not tracking ads and clicks, and I'm not tracking delivery of an impression. I'm actually tracking what they're doing, what they're looking at, how they're interacting with that. Instead of going to Ford to build and price that car, they're going to build and price it right there. And depending on how far they get into that process, we can use blockchain to manage things like microtransactions. Then I don't have to wait until the end of the month before the advertiser can pay me for those interactions, for those connections, right? None of this is out there, right? This isn't happening today, and this actually couldn't happen tomorrow. But what blockchain is and what blockchain does actually makes it possible that it happens in the future. So I'm not necessarily advocating for the death of the banner, but I am planning for it. And I am hoping that blockchain can make sure that I am ready for the death of the banner when it does happen.
We'll go through the use cases. So we have use cases from MyEx, Kochava, and MyEx. Just one disclaimer. It is an IAB Tech Lab event, but we don't endorse any product. The use cases are entirely the property and the propagation of the companies presenting. When we do, we announce it through our own public release. So let me invite the first use case from MyEx, and it's going to be Ben Feldman. He's going to help us walk us through that.
Hey, everybody. Yeah, so let's see here. Let's just jump into it a little bit. So for those of you who don't know anything about MyEx, essentially we are a guaranteed forward contract exchange for advertising. Starting out in digital advertising, but it's just for contracts. So it's independent of the type of media that is being transacted upon. So we can do print, we can do linear television in the future, but to start with, we're going with digital. So that's video, mobile, desktop, all that fun stuff. And for us, the reason why we focus on contracts and why blockchain is important to us is that we consider the contract to be kind of the heart of advertising. You've got two parties, a buyer and a seller, that are transacting in a contract. You've got a buyer who has capital or cash, and you've got a publisher or a seller or somebody who has a right to sell the inventory, who's promising to deliver such inventory that meets the specifications that the buyers want to make. So you've got targeting, you've got volumes, price, time frame, all of that fun stuff. And so when it comes to the contract, it gets complex really quickly. So we've got all of the various fun pieces of targeting, you've got the fun pieces of time, the asset in terms of the publisher itself, and all of those pieces that relate back and forth. And then that's just only the beginning of it, right? So then you get into the point of delivery happens and you get into reconciliation, and you wind up with all of these different ways of verifying. So in print, you've got circulation counts, and linear television, you've got gross rating points, and in digital, we've got all of the various verification pieces. So everything from viewability to fraud to targeting, everything imaginable in that regard. But if we take a step back and we look at what's involved in all of these pieces, so contracts, yeah, you've got two parties that right now are making things really complex because everything is so independent and different from everyone. We can kind of work towards standardizing those things. And you've got billion different reconciliation pathways. You've got all of these different pieces that can occur. But at the end of the day, it's two parties. It's a buyer and a seller, and it's the asset of inventory and the asset of cash being exchanged, and a verification process to show that one party has done their job and the other party has done their job. And that is where we come in. So what we have started to do, or what we have done, we're now live in terms of having a product that fully functions, is we've got a platform that standardizes the contract inventory assets as well as the campaign assets and the terms. So what we have is a way to take publisher inventory and put that against standards. So we've taken the IAB content categories, we've taken standard ad server targeting systems and all these things, and we came to these conclusions based on conversations with buyers and sellers. So the agencies, publishers, all these various people to kind of come together and create a standard that fits for everybody to use. Buyers are already buying against content. They're already buying against specific demographic information. You can go one layer deeper and look at people-based marketing, but if you go one step higher, it's demo. You've got age, gender, household income, all the fun stuff. And instead of having publishers create 1,000 different ways of listing their inventory, if you standardize it, now an advertiser can come in and see a bunch of pieces, just like in a financial world, and go, cool, that's the asset I want. I want that. That's what I'm looking for. So the first thing we did is we came up with the standards, and then we created a taxonomy based on that, and a translation layer to take all of the publisher inventory and map it to that. So a publisher can maintain their standard descriptions and targeting and all of those fun things, but we can list it in a way that buyers can actually see it and utilize that. And buyers can then list their campaigns, the same thing. So you can have a real two-sided market, which is something that's different than what the advertising world has had before. Like if you look at PMP and things like that, you've got the ability of publishers to list their campaign inventory, or sorry, their inventory assets, but everybody lists it differently, and a buyer has to come in and be like, okay, that's what I want, fits what I'm looking for, but they can't really list their asset without going through an RFP process and making it real complex and having to go back and forth. But so we standardized the taxonomy in terms of the inventory, also works on the campaign side. And then we looked at the terms, because terms winds up being the next piece. So things like frequency capping, things like block lists on the publisher side, things like who you want to use as your count of record, your verifiable source. So whether you want to use Moat, whether you want to use IAS, what's your methodology behind that? Why? You can put those into our system and contract on those. Put a contract together in a very simple way. And then you get into the delivery of the campaign, and then you get into reconciliation, where we're pulling in all the various details and trying to assist with the reconciliation process on that. And so if you take a step back and you look at simplifying all of these pieces, you've got standards that fit, right? So you've got a taxonomy, you've got terms, you've got delivery counts, you've got verification, and these are all pieces of information that fit really nicely into a double entry accounting methodology. So you've got buyers having cash and wanting to make sure that the inventory that they promised they get has been delivered, and you can show on a daily basis how many came in, how many came out, everything like that. And we put all that together and we start storing that on blockchain when we could have done it in a database, but the immutability aspect of it, the ability to do audits on it, the ability to understand historically what's all happening based on inventory and based on performance of activities starts to make sense. So that's what we've got. So we've got a blockchain. Currently, it's a private blockchain that we're using. It's not public at this point. We're the only ones writing to it. But we don't see a need for it at the moment to be public. Long term, sure, we might go that way. But essentially, the data is the important part, and the ability to have our clients be able to audit those records and know what's going on, but in a permission format, so that you don't wind up having a third party come in and say, hey, I want to know how that contract delivered. If you want part of the contract, you don't really get a say in it, but we can show it to the people that are rightfully having access to it. And so we store everything associated with the trades. And because we're based on NASDAQ's financial framework, built on top of their standard matching engine, which we've added some complexities to for advertising, we're storing the trade, we're storing the original orders, the buy side order and the sell side order that created the trade, any retrades, so the ability to have a buyer purchase a piece of inventory and then decide, you know what, I only want to deliver a campaign to half of this. I decided targeting doesn't quite mix with what I'm looking to do. They can potentially resell it, again, based on the terms. So if a publisher doesn't want to allow retrading, that's totally cool. But we store retrading, and then we start to look into the delivery aspects. So we pull in the reporting characteristics from the buyer's ad server if they're running that, the seller's ad server, any third-party metrics, whoever you're using for verification, everything like that. And we start to be able to do the reconciliation information with that. So smart contracts becomes the necessary next step in this. Because you've got a blockchain that can support those kind of functions, it's a question of if this is the right time for it. We're not using smart contracts at this very moment. The process of reconciliation is semi-manual. The reason for that is that there are so many different ways of doing reconciliation. Somebody's just using moat, somebody's using double verify, somebody's using IAS and moat and double verify and trying to link all these pieces together. And if you do that, you wind up down a rabbit hole of like one advertiser across 6 publishers has 6 different reconciliation methods. And it's unsustainable because if we only do one methodology, well, okay, great, that's good for now, but we need to understand how everybody else is doing things. And then we need to start to bring these into groups, into standardized methodologies that we can implement. It doesn't make sense for us all to be spending days and weeks doing reconciliation for a contract that ran for 3 days. It's silly. And we can expedite that process. And once you've got reconciliation taken care of, you can start to do payment transfers and things like that. So we handle the invoices and the payments in terms of making sure that the invoices go out based on the reconciliation numbers that we're tracking, and it's auditable by both sides. But long term, there is the potential, as Elizabeth said, to be able to start doing payments against this. So if you're starting to have an invoice go out after the day ran, you can start to do payments against that, move towards a much more closer to near real-time reconciliation methodology. All of this data that we collect, we start to be able to push back into our system. So you wind up with a feedback mechanism that shows performance of the different parties. Because it's a forward contract and you're booking this out in the future, you want to make sure that you know how people are going to perform. So you look at a seller and you go, okay, how are they performing in terms of delivery? Are they hitting 90% threshold, 95% threshold? Is it okay that they're only delivering 40% of the campaign that they promised that they deliver in the past? At the same time, on the buyer side, how are they doing on payments? Are they meeting the agreements in terms of they're paying on net 30, net 60, everything like that? And so then we also start to see the aggregated performance of the various instruments. So the packages of inventory based on content category and demo and location and all these fun pieces can become standardized, and you can start to look at these long term and understand how the market is trending and understand pricing from both a buyer and a seller perspective. Maybe you're a publisher that's had good inventory, but you haven't really been exposed to the market. You haven't been able to get the agency meetings that you've been wanting to get. So you've been pricing things low to get there. But now you're able to see how other people are trading, not necessarily who, but the average performance of similar inventory, and see, oh, maybe I'm not pricing it too much, or maybe I'm pricing it too high. But you know what? I'm New York Times. I can get away with it. I can price really high just for having really quality news because I know that that's there. So we can start to get all that information and pull it all back together for them. This is more in terms of the reconciliation piece. What we wind up with is the need for interoperability. Our blockchain is specific to contracts. We are not involved in the reconciliation. We're not involved with delivery. We're not involved with any of the tracking activities. So what we need to have is the ability to have the different blockchains that people are using. We see the need for it because, to the point, you want to know that the site is who the site is. You've got a blockchain to be able to verify the publisher's requests. You've got want to make sure that the user is real, that it's not fraud, all these various pieces. And we need to know that in terms of the reconciliation so that we can pull that information in. So we see it as breaking out in terms of a few different types of blockchains that could exist. So you've got verification, you've got our contract system, you've got payment processing, all these various pieces. I mean, the tokenization is huge, but we don't necessarily need to be the party to do that. We just need to be able to make sure that when there's a token that's utilized, we can transact and push it across between the various parties. And it's the relationship of pushing data back and forth that we see is really important for the industry moving forward as we start to fragment and look around at all the different types of ways of doing blockchains. As long as we have a standard of making sure that everybody can communicate, we get to a point where we can transfer the appropriate data back and forth between blockchains without worrying about exposure of data, but also making sure that the data is processed and needed accordingly. So we see it as something sort of like a data bus or a chain bus, if you want to call it that, to kind of link and have standards against the data sets to link everything together. So I mean, at the end of the day, we do contracts, and that's what we see as being really important for advertising to make sure that everything fits together. But we see everybody else having a good part to play in it too. Any questions? Yeah.
So the solution that you've described here is more of a centralized solution. So I'm wondering, how do you take advantage of some of the benefits of blockchain, which is a decentralized solution? And then you have a single point of failure. Blockchain also enables trustless verification.
Totally.
Where here you're expecting everyone to trust your solution.
Yeah, so again, we're at a point where we needed to get this as a ledger. So we're using this to record everything right now, and it is private at the moment, but it doesn't have to stay that way. That's the nice thing. We can push this into a decentralized manner. But with that, you start to get into the questions of not only the verification, but what's the incentive to have other people being able to hold this and use it? So whether that is having like the verification providers become a part of the system where they're doing work to verify the users, and that becomes the proof of work to be able to translate value back and forth, we can get there. The contracts, as it sits, we're an API-based system, so you can plug this into a bunch of different places. The action of what's going into the contract, that's where it's standardized, and so that's where we've got the taxonomy of the contract itself in terms of the inventory asset, the campaign asset, the terms, and all of those pieces. And that's something that can be pushed beyond just us. We're open to that, and it's sort of just it's private at the moment, but it doesn't have to stay that way. So we can open that up and gain all of the values of it. But it's more of a, like at the moment, it's sort of, I don't want to say the proof of concept, but it's more just making sure that everything works. We can plug everything in.
So have you thought about how that decentralized solution, like a centralized exchange?
Yeah, not so much the exchange part, but more the connections in terms of storing the data. We see it as being, like if you look at, you've got the holding companies and the agencies underneath the holding companies. They're on the buy side, and you've got either individual publishers or publisher groups on the sell side. And that's without even getting into like third parties that are just interested in monetizing things without actually adding any real value to the middle. So what you wind up with is 2 or 3 big players or groups of players that can act as connection points to a contract blockchain and be able to put things into it on either side. That's where it goes in the long-term distributed view. Is like it doesn't have to be through our UI specifically to be able to link information together, but you need a standard to be able to put it all together and make it work. So that's where we are providing at the moment. Long term, 5 years from now, yeah, I mean, it may go completely decentralized. We'll see.
I have a question. So you have mentioned immutability as one of the reasons why you chose blockchain.
Correct.
But who is this immutability for? For you, because like you don't trust your systems that can fail, or for your clients who do not trust you.
It's less about trusting us and more about the validity of contracts over time. So if you've got the records of a contract in terms of what the buy side order is and the sell side order is, in terms of the volume of impressions over a set length of time, and you've got delivery against that, if you've got the ability to record the impressions for today and the impressions for tomorrow and the impressions for Wednesday or Friday, forgetting what day it is, as reconciliation happens, currently, like the ad servers will give you like every 20 days they'll update their numbers. Some are quicker than that. Some are at like a 5-day turnaround to update the day 5 days before. And so if you just change that number, now it's like, well, wait, which was the right one? Are they going to change it on me again? How does this affect anything? Whereas if you've got a double entry accounting system that you don't change, that's fixed, then if it was 250 impressions today and in 5 days they change it to 270, well, now it's just that additional 20 is shown. So you know that at least the 250 is delivered, and that other 20, if that changes, cool, you can do a payout against that today, and then if it drops 10 impressions tomorrow, you do a payout just against that. And it's more just an accounting activity than it is a trust issue, if that makes sense.
So you're saying like you provide more real-time data or more like daily data and sign it daily and put it to the blockchain?
Yeah. So so we're booking the transactions associated with. We pull the information in from the various third parties because we're not an ad server, we're not a verification system. We pull those in from third parties and we associate that with the campaign and record it on blockchain against it. So we can see the whole history of delivery against the campaign that is running against the contract to understand the performance and the performance of the seller who's representing the inventory that they're going to sell.
Okay, I'm trying to understand the whole concept here, and I don't see any particular reason I would prefer blockchain for that instead of like database solution.
Right. So we could have built this on just a standard database, but the issue is being able to know that, well, the scalability of hardware. We're hoping to get to very large sums of trades and where it starts to make sense to expand this out beyond just ourselves and start to have this in a distributed manner. But B, with the database, no matter how secure you have that database, you can still just go in and make a change to it. I mean, you can write specific rules behind it, but we had the ability to start from a clean slate, and it just made a lot of sense for us to look at it and say, okay, we need a ledger, we need financial rigor behind it. Based on a financial platform, we can bring the concepts of financial accounting to advertising. So let's go with a system that's immutable and make sure that it's locked down, and we don't have to worry about that so much. So it's less about hardware constraints or trusted parties. It's more just about, okay, we've got accounting. We need to make sure that this stays consistent.
Got it. And so for blockchain, in order to actually implement immutability, you need to sign the transactions or blocks of transactions, and you need to spend, like people are already told, you need to spend computing time on that.
Right.
So do you spend a lot of computing time on that, or it's just an immediate signature that you put there? So changing a number which was like 10 days ago, it will be a matter of recomputing 10 signatures, which is a fast process.
Right. So part of it is that, yes, I mean, essentially we're booking them into the transactions into a block that is then booked. But because we're the only ones writing to it, it comes back to using it as a database at the moment. So we understand that the restrictions on that and the time of booking it and booking the transactions and then mining or doing the cryptography to lock it down and book it is the time consuming piece. And that's just, it's a single party writing to it at the moment, so it's less of a concern. It's more about the immutability for the long term and the long haul of it.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Welcome. Anything else?
Does this have the ability to programmatic buying and selling, or is it mostly for just direct IO-based kind of things where you're reserving inventory?
Yeah, so we see that there's a contract in programmatic the same way there is in direct buying. The difference is who the counterparties are. So in direct buying, it's between your agency or your buyer, advertiser agency, and the publisher. But with programmatic, you're looking at the agency and potentially the DSP. It's likely not the publisher simply because of the targeting metrics are so flexible, and the contract at this point is between an agency and a DSP. So we're working on how to get that implementation, changing the taxonomy to be able to handle that. But yeah, it is completely applicable for that long term.
Are you displacing a certain group of companies right now, or is this kind of an additive thing that you expect people to do? So
we see it as additive, except around the reconciliation process. So it's additive in that we're not touching, like we're not kicking out DSPs, we're not kicking out SSPs, we're not kicking out anything like that. But it's more of a streamlining process when it comes to the ability to start to control your transactions and being able to push your inventory out to a broader audience of buyers, and have buyers have an ability to actually start to show the campaigns that they're looking to list to a broader audience than through just a standard RFP process. But at the end of the day, the reconciliation piece, which takes up so much time, can be streamlined and start to simplify that and reduce costs for people as well.
Do you have an API to this blockchain or the database that you have that you're building?
Yeah, so for our blockchain, we're the only ones plugged into it at this point. We are working on APIs for connecting to our platform, but not into blockchain at this point in time. That's sort of one of the pieces where we see the IAB having a lot of value in terms of helping to identify what those standards need to be so that we can get the interoperability between pieces start to make sense before we just go and write a standard that then has to be changed because it's only for us and nobody else can use it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the way I look at it is just knowing the ecosystem, all the different parts. I think it's actually a really good approach that you're taking, because really the infrastructure and advertising isn't there, right? And so you got to start somewhere. And I feel like you guys are planting a seed essentially that starts the foundation of what's to become blockchain and advertising.
Cool.
Because essentially, once you get everything distributed and you have APIs and you're managing the contracts, then on one side you can call those APIs and start to programmatically get all of these contracts working with the individual ad servers. So I see the bigger picture as this is a start, and it's a great start because as it continues to evolve, you will have planted the seed for people to use those APIs in a standardized way, and it'll eventually be decentralized.
Exactly.
So I like what you're doing.
Cool. Appreciate it.
One request, please, that you can introduce yourself.
Hey, I'm Tracy Freed. What is the difference between smart contracts and smart legal?
Yes, sorry. So smart contracts is the kind of, smart contracts can be broken into smart contracts versus smart legal contracts. So smart contracts can be the encompassing of both, where smart legal contracts winds up being the framework of the language and the requirements for the contract. Usually it's a human readable form, but it also has the specifications that are taken from the smart contract and transferred into that versus, and you wind up with sort of two different versions. There's like the internal, which is just doing the actual computational work under smart contract based on what's decided between the parties. And then you wind up with the smart legal contract, which winds up as being sort of the output of the agreed upon contract that becomes human readable and understood as to how it actually works. But it has to meet the legal framework that exists either by state or by country and everything like that, and how it can all go about that. So there is a differentiation that's happening, and it's important to understand that there's the distinction. Just because you have something being able to run computationally to run the rules that you've created, there's also the ability to sign off and make sure that that's agreed upon by both parties too.
So is there actual legal terms in smart legal contracts separate and apart from business terms?
Yeah, this is where it gets more than over my head, and I'm not a lawyer. Yeah, it's business logic, but there's also, like, in the human readable form, there become sort of segments of the contract that are standardized that also get implemented into it. So you can think of it as almost a reverse OCR. Like you're taking the concepts from the contract and just pushing it into a form that everybody can read. Welcome.
Hi, I'm David. I had a quick question. I was confused. You mentioned earlier in the presentation that you're not using smart contracts at the moment,
Correct.
Manual.
Yep.
But then you talk about it. So I'm wondering, like, where is it automated in the process versus where is it manual?
Sure.
How do you get down this flow?
So this is looking at where we see interoperability and the need for it in order to make sure that we can handle it within smart contracts. If you've got one party doing tokens and being the money transfer point, and you've got another party that's doing the verification activities, those become two trigger points that you need to have to be able to make sure that the smart contract is met. And so having those trigger points within the smart contract where you're saying, okay, the verification of this impression has happened, now I can transfer the payment between that, and I need to be able to relay that out. That has to be, you have to have the interoperability in place to really make that work. Right now, what we have is a process where we record all of the impressions that are delivered, and verification happens based on what we have in our reconciliation rules, and we say, hey, here's what we've got as the reconciliation count. Does this work for you? Is this what we've agreed upon by the parties? Please sign off, yes or no. Cool, yes, great. Now we send an invoice over to the buyer. Buyer pays it. We do the transfer that way through a standard accounting practice. Long term, though, as we get verification concepts and reconciliation ideas brought into a form that everybody can work, and we can put those in terms, then we can start to look at it and say, okay, this is the verification process you've decided to use, or the partners that you've decided to use. Here's the reconciliation process that both parties have agreed upon. Now the smart contract can be created, and we can run everything right through that without having to worry about people being confused or wondering what was actually decided upon. Does that make sense? Yeah, so let's say, so you want it like a current versus future? In terms of reconciliation? Or? Just in terms of how it's similar. Sure, so right now we've got a campaign running between a buyer and a seller, and they're using, let's say, Moat as the verification provider. So on a daily basis, we're pulling in reports from the publisher's ad server, from the agency's ad server, and a third-party count from Moat. And we're seeing what the discrepancies are between those. And we're saying that Moat is the count of record, and therefore what their count is what's going to be verified against the contract. So for, let's say, the day it was expected to run 1,000 impressions, and the publisher's ad server shows 1,000, the agency's ad server shows 800, and Moat shows 900. We're going to use the 900 as the amount that's equated to the contract delivery to understand what that is. But the manual part is basically saying, okay, 900 is delivered. That's what everybody has agreed upon. Is this cool right now? Because if you have a concern with this, you need to let us know what your other methodologies are for reconciliation, so we can start to implement those and make sure everything's done. So we've got it's semi-automated in that we've got the process right now for one, but we know that there's a bunch of other ones and that everybody uses a different methodology. And we want to understand those so that if someone's using Moat for viewability, they're using IAS for fraud, and because those come back as like a percentage basis, you wind up looking at it and saying, okay, do we just deduct the impressions that were considered fraud from the overall count of impressions that were delivered by Moat? Or do we say that we take the Moat number and the 10% overlap of fraud was already accounted for in the IAS number, so really we only have to pull up maybe 15% from Moat to understand what the final number really needs to be. Well, that's what we want to get to, exactly. But because every advertiser can have a different methodology for every publisher, you wind up going exponentially huge in terms of the numbers that are possible. You want to say something?
This is going on. Yeah.
So if we can understand what those methodologies are, we can start to standardize them, and we'll lose some of the customized versions that people are doing, but in the long run, you'll save time and make it up in the long run.
I'm afraid we can't take more questions.
Grab me later. Happy to answer anything.
We're running slightly behind time.